Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Andertons TV. And today it is my massive honour to be joined by quite possibly the hardest working, most talented, sublimely modest, say no more, Mr. Albert Lee.
Hardest working, that's for sure.
It's just, and we will get to that, but you are, you work so hard. You're a legend. Let's just dive straight in there. I mean,
well, it's easy to become a legend if you're still around in your 70s and you manage to do a gig or two. Yeah, no, I've been very fortunate to get the gigs are still there for me.
I think last time I saw you, you were celebrating your 70th year, and you had 250 gigs in the calendar that year or something. It was just like unbelievable.
Yes, it's getting to be that now, 200 to 250.
Good for you, man. Well, I mean, I guess so. You are definitely known as one of the finest guitar players that this country's ever produced, but particularly known for breaking the mold really a bit, making your name as a country player, from a country that perhaps typically hadn't produced many country players. Right. But so let's go back to that sort of, where did your love with the guitar, first start?
Well, Lonnie Donegan.
Right.
Of course, anybody of my age were inspired by Lonnie, and it was simple, three chords.
The skiffle, yeah.
And then started to listen to the rock and roll, Buddy Holly, and his solos were relatively easy to copy. You can figure out, he's doing that in the first position, and
And what was it, a musical upbringing though for you?
I had piano lessons for a couple of years. My dad played the piano and the accordion a little bit, and he'd play in the pub occasionally. He'd never earn any money, but someone would buy him a beer, But I started bashing on the piano at home, and my parents said, we better get you some lessons. And I think I was 10,
right,
maybe. And I only did it for 2 years. I did almost a year with one teacher, and then I kind of stopped for a while, and we'd moved house, moved up. We were living in Greenwich when I started my lessons, and then moved up to Blackheath, and I started a new school, and they said, well, we better look for a piano teacher around here. So I got another teacher who was a lot more strict than the first one. She didn't cut any slack at all. No, she was, said, don't look at your hands, she'd whack her fingers. Yeah. I'm going to have your dad build the board so you can't see the keyboard, But I was lazy. I didn't practice.
I can relate to that. I mean, and I don't think even much changed. I mean, you're presumably talking mid to late 50s here.
Mid 50s.
And I remember when I had piano lessons, and then we're talking late 70s, early 80s. I don't think much of, it was very strict, and nobody ever went, what music do you like? Let's try, it was always, here's some music that you almost certainly don't like. Let's play that. Hard, isn't it, to try and keep that interest going?
But I'm so glad that I did it, at least I had a somewhat basic grasp of music from that, But then eventually, I think the second teacher said to my parents, well, he's not really making much progress here. He's not practicing,
Yeah.
And we had the typical English front room that was never used, where the piano was,
best,
and it was cold too. And the next lesson would come along, and it was obvious I hadn't, worked at this piece I was supposed to be doing, and she.
You were never going to be the next Jerry Lee Lewis then, or anything like that. Or
well, no,
probably wanted to be.
I guess I heard Jerry Lee Lewis a little later on, I guess. and a friend of mine kind of figured out some of the runs that he was doing, and I thought, oh yeah, that's how he does that. So even though I stopped having the lessons, I'd still play away on the piano. And then we discovered skiffle. I was still at school then, and we did couple of friends and I decided we wanted a skiffle group. One of the guys had a school cello.
I love it.
And I was playing piano. So
a proper cello. He didn't just have the broom handle with the bit of
no,
string into a box.
Cello.
A proper,
he was taking
awesome.
cello lessons, you know.
Awesome.
But no, he never made a career as a musician. He ended up owning a garage.
Sensible man. Sensible man.
And he's now retired.
Very well off.
Which I can't afford to do. Yeah. So.
But guitar-wise, so where did this? Was it? You know?
Well, a school friend had a guitar. Actually, it wasn't his. It was his brother's guitar. His brother had come back from the Navy with this cheap old arch top, and I think I was looking at some piano music. I picked up the piano stool, looking through the music in there, and I said, I told my mate who lived about 4 doors away. I said, look, I had piano music here, but it's got chords written above it. You know, the little
dots type on the tab, like on the string charts. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I didn't realise was at the time they were ukulele ukulele chords, but at least it was a start, you know.
Yeah.
I said, look what I found. He said, oh, I've got a book here, you know, with guitar chords in it. And I thought, oh, great. So we both started at the same time, and I was borrowing this guitar until his mother would send him round, you know, go, get that guitar off of him, you know. He's had it long enough. And I actually played guitar for about 18 months without actually owning one. I think I borrowed 3 different guitars, and they weren't good guitars, but you know, I got the gist of it.
Was that just because your dad had said, look, you didn't see it through on the piano, so I'm not buying you a guitar, or was it just because you just couldn't get guitars? You know,
no,
too
they
expensive,
were available. You know, I guess. You know, I think. The first guitar they bought for me, I don't know where we'd found it, but it was a Spanish guitar, and I think they paid like £3, 10 shillings for it, you know. Yeah. And I immediately put steel strings on it, which you're not supposed to do.
You didn't break it, did you? With the
no,
oh, okay.
No. Oh, no.
I was thinking that'd be heartbreaking, wouldn't it?
Worked. No, and it worked, you know, but I only played that for a month or so, and it was obvious to my parents that I was making some progress with this, and I was really keen to do it. So it was Christmas of '58. I just turned 15. I'd been slung out of the school where I was. I was in grammar school, but I wasn't really working hard enough to stay there either. So they said, oh, you're not doing very well here, are you, Lee? I think you better go. And there's someone reminded me a long time ago, actually, I took a guitar to school. And it wasn't mine. I took it to school, and the vice master saw me with it. He said, oh, you won't get very far with that, Lee, you know.
All pretty discouraging stuff, isn't it? Get your hair cut.
Yeah. So anyway, I got slung out of there at 15. But that Christmas, my folks pulled their Christmas money that they, you know, been putting money in every week in a Christmas club, and found a Hofner president in the Exchange and Mart.
Fantastic.
And it was, I don't know, about £25, £23 or something.
Did it look, one of, where's, do you know, you can't, I don't think you can see it, but I got a Hofner. Well,
there's one right there.
Is that a Senator? The Sunburst one. Could you pass me that one over, would you?
It was a little bit like that.
Yeah, I think they all had a similar vibe, didn't they? This is fun, because this is. I mean, you definitely won't. You probably won't get a tune out of this, because I think I've slackened all the strings off because the net. Oh, maybe not. There we go.
Anyway, we went to this guy's house in Plumstead, I think it was, you know, and pulled out the guitar and he handed it to me, and I'd learned to play guitar boogie at that time. They're all going, whoa, wow. We didn't know that guitar could do that. So yeah, I got that for Christmas. And yeah, and that was the first guitar that was actually playable.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think in this country, Hofner was, you know, it was so tough to be able to find Gibsons and Fenders, and so astronomically expensive. And Hofner, I think, was the main sort of European brand that was a sort of an okay alternative, wasn't it?
Well, there was an import embargo from the States, yeah.
I didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
So you just couldn't get that stuff?
No, they were regarded as luxury goods, and we couldn't get them until 1960.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's why you see so few. Yeah, you see all the black and whites that you see of the old English bands. None of them are playing, or very, very few are playing, unless they'd made it really big. None of them were playing Fenders or Gibsons.
Or they went over to the States and brought one back. You know, I remember there was a guy called Malcolm Mitchell. He had a trio, a little kind of jazz trio, and you'd see him on TV. And I remember seeing a picture of him with a Telecaster, and this was in the 50s. So he must have gone to the States, you know, maybe gone over, played on a ship or whatever, you know, and came back with this Telecaster. But no, this is the best we could find at the time. And there were British manufacturers too, like Grimshaw, were making pretty nice guitars. Like there were double cutaway that I forget what it was called, the model, but it was a bit like a 330 or whatever, you know. But no, it wasn't until 1960. So by 59, we had a little group. You know, it started off as a skiffle group, and then I used to go to the West End and look in the music shops up there. And of course, I used to go to Len Styles in Lewisham. That was our local place, you know, and you'd see a Hofner Club 60 hanging in the window. Look at that! Oh,
I'm trying to remember. Did you ever used to venture? The only reason I asked this, and I'm trying to remember what it was. My dad, before he and my granddad started Andertons, worked in a little music shop on the Fulham Road, and I can't remember what, but it would have been absolutely that, like 1960, 62, something like that. It would have been. And I'm trying to remember what the guy's name was. I want to say it was Harry something, but I'm wondering whether I'm getting confused because that was my granddad's name as well. But. He's probably sitting at home watching this, shouting the name of the music shop at the telly. But yeah, I mean, completely different vibe now to, you know, you go walk into a music shop now and see 500 guitars on display. God, it was like.
So I was in Charing Cross Road, and there was Jennings who sold Vox amps, you know, and accordions, of course, you know. And they had this guitar in the window, and my eyes popped out, and it was a little bit like this, really. It was a 3 pickup, and he had a tremolo. And I thought, God, it looks just like the guitar that Buddy Holly played, you know. Of course, the Chirping Crickets record, if you ever see one, look for it. The headstock is not visible in the photograph on the cover, so you can't see all the tuners on one side, you know. So I saw this guitar and I thought, well, it looks a little bit like that guitar that Buddy played. I didn't know what a Fender was. So I talked my dad into letting me trade the Hofner in for this guitar. It was a Grazioso.
Okay, which is Italian, isn't it? I think
No, they were Czechoslovakian.
Oh, okay. Of course they were. That well-known Czechoslovakian family name.
But I think maybe the electronics were Italian, because it. God, I forget the name of the pickups now, but it eventually became the Futurama.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but it was the earlier version of that, and it had a maple neck.
Yeah.
You know, the Futuramas had a rosewood or a darker wood, whatever it was, you know. So I persuaded my dad to let me get this guitar. It was £85 second hand.
Whoa.
Which is, you know, when I think back on it, I mean, the guy must have, you know, made a fortune on it. He must have paid nothing for it. But everybody,
put that into context. You're £85, 1960. So you are literally talking 6 weeks money. What have you been earning that time? If you
Oh,
were full
I
time,
was
20
by
£20
that
a
time
week?
I just started work, and I was getting about £3 a week.
Oh, £3 a
Three or
week.
£4 a week.
So
yeah.
£85. You're literally talking about 3 months worth of money almost.
Yeah, I was doing.
To put that in context now,
paint
that's like
spraying
that'll be the dearest guitar in Andertons, is the equivalent of what that second-hand Grazia. He saw you coming, didn't he? Definitely.
Well, he'd sold a number of them because George Harrison had one.
Oh, okay.
And,
Maybe they're good.
They were okay, looking back on it. And Tony Sheridan, who was a big guy, and he played one on TV. And anyway, I soon realised that it wasn't the Fender that I thought it was, And it was like the following year. I did my first tour in 1960, January of 1960. The bass player and I had the band had a Selmer True Voice 19T. It was with a 12-inch speaker, had 3 inputs.
So you all plugged into that?
We all plugged into that, But then we eventually became a trio. So the bass player, he started off with a double bass, actually, and we talked him into buying this double bass. And then we'd heard about these electric basses, and I guess we didn't see too many of them around, And he found this Hofner violin bass. It's before McCartney had one. And so he had that, and I had my Grazioso. We plugged into the same amp, and off we went to Scotland, working with one of Larry Palm's singers called Dickie Pride.
Right.
Did a tour with him, and playing to all these 12-year-old girls, screaming girls in the dance halls up there. I came back from that tour with about £20, I think, and we went up on steam train. That's how long ago it was. Came back and I thought, I've got to get an amp. We're going to find an amp. And I went into Selmer's, and the salesman in there, he said, we're getting some American amps in. So he showed me this catalogue, and it was a Supro catalogue.
Mm-hmm. We've had some Supros.
Yeah, there's one over there.
Yeah.
And the amp I chose out of the catalogue without even trying it. It's American, it's got to be good. So I chose this amp, and it was about £65 or something.
Expensive again.
And eventually it arrived, I thought, wow, I had a 15-inch Jensen in it, And I thought, well, that's great. I've got a guitar that sounds okay. I've got a really good amp. And the band at that time had decided that we needed an echo unit, because a lot of the bands had echo units, either Benson's, and we had a Klimt Ecolette.
I never even heard of that. A tape echo, was it?
Tape echo, yeah. And my dad signed the papers for that, my long-suffering dad. And so we had that for a while, and so I had a pretty good sound, And I guess it was a few months later in 60, maybe early 61, when you'd go into Selmer's, and there was a whole wall of Gibson guitars from the Super 400 on down, And I thought, this is it, we've got these American guitars. And just down the road, Jennings has started to get Strats and Tellys,
Amazing.
And the Telecaster was like £120 or something, and I paid £85 for this piece of crap, in comparison.
Who was influencing you at the time? Because you've obviously you're now touring and doing the little trio band. Are you listening to sort of lots of American bands on pirate radio, or how are you developing your own thing?
Well, the rare occasion you'd get some rock and roll on the BBC, but it was records. People would pass them around, and I didn't have a record player at the beginning, but it took me a while to get a turntable. But Buddy Holly, I guess, and after Lonnie, playing the skiffle and the excitement of all that stuff that he used to do. Yeah, I'll get this off your lap. So, I was exposed to a lot of great rock and roll all at one time, you know, like Chuck Berry and Gene Vincent.
Yeah.
And someone gave me Gene Vincent's first album, Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, and the guitar player just mesmerized me, just blew me away, Cliff Gallup.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I listened to what he did. Even now, you listen to it, and it's really good stuff and tasteful, you know. So I learned. He did 2 albums with Gene. He didn't tour. He wanted to stay home. He didn't tour very much, you know. And I think he had his guitar stolen while he was on the road. So that probably made him want to stay home. So his touring is not as good as I think I'll stay and get a day job, you know. But he played on the first 2 albums, and I learned every solo note for note, as did Jeff Beck, of course. You know, Jeff was. This is around the same time we were learning all these Cliff Gallup solos, you know, and I was learning, you know, Buddy Holly stuff, and of course Scotty Moore.
I was about to say, it must have been like early Elvis stuff as well then.
I love the Elvis stuff, of course, and when it came time to choose an American guitar, for some reason I had my mind set on an ES-175.
Okay.
I thought, I think I could afford that. Get my folks to sign up again. So yeah, it was an ES-175, and I decided I wanted a Bigsby on it. You know, Cliff Gallup was using the Bigsby, very tasteful too, the way he used it. You know, no dive bombs. You know, but so a friend of mine just started to play guitar. He said, I'm going to buy a guitar. And he said, I've been looking at the Burns guitars. I think they just started to make Burns in the early 60s. I said, oh no, don't bother with that. I said, they've got Gibsons up in Selma's now, you know, let's go up there, you know. So I talked him into buying a Les Paul Jr., which is, that was about £70 or something, you know. And it was a great guitar, and of course I immediately borrowed it. We used to do gigs together, and he'd let me play it.
So did you never get your 175, or
I never did.
You never did get the 175.
I'll get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So we do these little gigs. We play little clubs around Blackheath and Lee Green, and you know, and Greenwich. And boy, the sound I had, you know, with this Les Paul Jr., and I still had the tape echo and the Supro. I was just getting this great Scotty Moore sound, and I was getting a handle on the solos too. I was playing pretty good solos by then, you know. And I thought, no, I've got to get my 175, you know. And anyway, I'd make a little pilgrimage up to Selma's on Saturday, on the train from Blackheath, and I was in there one day and you know, trying out the guitars, and I thought, well, yeah, maybe this would be the one I'll buy, you know. And this guy heard me playing. He said, "Oh, sounds good." He said, "Are you in a band?" I said, "Well, kind of, yeah." He said, "We're looking for a guitar player," and he said, "Yeah, you don't need a guitar. We've got a guitar already." You know, I said, "Oh, sounds interesting," you know. So he said, "Come over to my place," you know. So we went over to his flat. He opened up this guitar case, and there's a brand new Les Paul Custom with a Bigsby on it. And I said, "I'll join you."
Yeah, I mean, sign me up.
So he said, "Well, okay, we'll have a rehearsal tomorrow." This was a Saturday. He said, "We'll have a rehearsal that Sunday morning. You know, if you want to come up to town, and we'll have a little rehearsal." And I actually talked him into letting me take the guitar home, which he may never have seen me again.
Exactly.
You know? So I went home with this guitar. I was just so excited, you know. I thought, boy, look at this. I don't believe it, you know. So I did show up for the rehearsal. I was with that band for 18 months, 2 years maybe. And it was a strange situation with the band, because the gigs we did, they'd pool the money to pay off the instruments, you know. So we'd earn no money playing, you know, but we would be paying off the hire purchase on the instruments. And my dad didn't think that was a very good idea, so my dad had a word with him. He said, well, look, why don't you let him, we'll take over the payments on the guitar, you know, which I did, you know, so I carried on paying the payments on the Les Paul, and I just loved it. So the nucleus of that band is that Pat Donaldson was on bass, and I can't remember the name of the drummer now. I'm embarrassed. But anyway, we became, when we weren't doing gigs at the weekend, we became the house band at the Two Eyes Coffee Bar in Old Compton Street, which is where all the musicians used to come down there and sit in, you know.
Yeah.
So, and there were three of us, and none of us could sing. I didn't sing then, you know. I was very reluctant to learn to try singing. But, you know, there'd always be somebody there who'd jump up and sing an Elvis song or whatever, you know. And Jimmy Page used to come down there. He was working with, I think he was with Neil Christian at the time. And I think he had a Gretsch at that time. This would have been 61. And he liked my Les Paul and my Supro so much that he eventually bought.
Of course, because he was very famous for using Supros, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I was. Stuff. Yeah. He liked my Supro a lot, so he went and bought one. And I guess he couldn't get one like mine. Cause I don't think I didn't see them in Selma's on a regular basis. Right. I think they just got a delivery. And left it at that, you know, and I got probably the biggest one, you know. It's probably like 35, 40 watts with a 15-inch speaker, you know. So he eventually bought one. I think someone told me last night, actually, he bought a 210, which he eventually put a 12 in.
Right. I'm not a big... my image of Jimmy Page is always standing in front of lots of Marshall amplifiers, and you know. But apparently, it is a lot. All that early stuff, studio stuff's all Supros and Telecasters or something.
Yeah,
isn't it?
apparently so. Yeah. So so he had a Les Paul like mine, which sad for him. He that was stolen. He lost it sometime after that, and he used to use it on the sessions when he started doing sessions in London in the '60s. So we were the house band at the Two Eyes, and people, you know, lots of people would come down there, and got hooked up with a sax player who had an idea for a band, and we played a couple of gigs in the West End, and then around that time the Germans started coming over. You know, the guys who owned the, you know, the. I think the Star Club had already started by then, but the Top Ten. So off we went to Hamburg, drove to Hamburg, and played at the Top 10 Club. You know,
there was a lot of British bands cut their teeth on that circuit.
Oh yeah, I couldn't believe it. You know, we're being in this little area, you know, sort of red light district of, you know, it's pretty exciting for a 17-year-old in the red light district of Hamburg, and there were lots of bands there. You know, lots of Liverpool guys there. You know, it was around the time the Beatles were in and out of town, but I didn't see them when I was there. But my hero, who later became my hero, was Tony Sheridan.
Right.
And he was playing there. You know,
some of these names that and we'll come on to a bit about how much of a fan my father-in-law was of your music. But when we used to talk about guitar stuff, he was in bands and had obviously never made it as successful as you did, but lots of stories about the bands that he was in and doing the Hamburg sort of circuit, and but all the same era. And so lots of the names that you're coming out with, although I'm not massively familiar with them myself, they're all names that he used to talk
Tony
about.
Sheridan was the guy, you know, and the Beatles used to back him.
Right.
At the Star Club, you know, they played on a couple of records of his. So not long after that, I started to... Well, actually, I was playing with a drummer, Barry Jenkins, who later went on to play with Nashville Teens and the Animals. But we were playing locally in South East London, and his dad was in show business. He was an extra. He was in a bunch of movies then, you know, and they knew this agent. And this agent got a call from Germany from this band that urgently needed a drummer and a guitar player.
Okay.
And they were going to fly us over. I thought, wow. So we jumped on it. It was our first flight. We jumped on this old Viscount, I think it was, flew to Dusseldorf to be met by this German band, which was the last thing we expected, you know. God, yeah. I mean, my jaw dropped. And I said, oh, yeah, Doug, great to have you. And they saw my Gibson. And they didn't like the look of that at all. Oh, we need to get you a Fender, you know. Because around that time, there were lots of playing around Germany and Holland. There were a lot of Indonesian bands, and they all played.
Really?
Yeah, and they were all like playing kind of shadow stuff. They had big Fender amps and Fender guitars, you know.
Wow.
They leaf around. And Andy Thielman was the guy. The Thielman brothers were the big band. Andy Thielman was a pretty good guitar player.
Right.
Yeah. So they saw my Les Paul and they said, "Wow, you know, no, we've got to get you a real guitar, you know." So until I started to play it, I thought, "Whoa, that sounds good." so yeah, and I'd taken. And that's right. They had an amp there, and I was stuck with. Well, let's see. I must have taken my amp out to Germany.
On the flight as well.
I must have taken it on
It's
the
a wonder
plane.
it worked when it got there.
Well, it didn't work for long because I was there. I was stuck there for 3 months with these guys. They were crazy, you know. But I mean, the lead singer was especially crazy. But he remained my friend for many years, and sadly he passed away about 4 years ago. But yeah, he was nuts, and he'd get all these instruments. He'd go to the music stores and he just talked them into letting him. You know, he just wouldn't pay for them. You know.
I think we got some customers like that.
Yeah, and
Pete Honore.
Yeah. Well, actually, going back to Selma's, I mean, the guys in Selma's were great. I'd go in there, and they knew that I could play, and I was desperate for a better amp at that time, and they said, "Oh, we've got these Gibson amps here and that." And yeah, there was one called a 400. I think it was 212. You know, and I said, "Well, take it out and try it on a gig." You know, they used to do that a lot back then. You know.
Yeah. So
I remember taking it on a gig, and I said, "Yeah, it's all right, but it's not quite right." You know, and it wasn't until I tried a Fender amp that I realised, oh, that's what I want. I want that twang. You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd forgotten that I had the Supra on that first visit to Germany with the German band. So I remember we finished up one night. We played 6 hours a night, 7 hours a night, 9 hours on a Sunday. We played from 4 till 6, an hour off, and then we'd play for another 6 hours or so. You know, and then I guess later on, you know, you play 45 minutes and 15 off, but back then we just kept playing straight through. And if one would want to run off to the toilet or whatever, you know.
You must have had some repertoire of music.
It didn't matter. So if you knew a verse or two of a song, you know, and you make up the words, and they couldn't understand the lyrics anyway back then, you know, not like they can now. So, I remember I showed up at the gig one night and someone had poured beer in my amp. And I couldn't imagine how it happened because there was hardly anybody there, you know, and I got there. I don't remember if I left I used to leave my guitar there sometimes, and not, because it was a bit of a long walk up the hill to these digs that we were in. So, beer was poured in my Supro, and it kind of worked, and then they got this guy to look at it, and oh God, you know, it wasn't working right. And anyway, we decided that I had to get another amp, you know. So he obviously went to a music store and
did a deal,
charmed a bassman out of him, you know, piggyback
Nice.
bassman.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, fantastic, you know. Anyway, I eventually the drummer and I managed to escape this band, you know. At the end of the month, we had enough money to get a train back to London, and he got a Ludwig snare and a couple of big cymbals, you know, and I had this. I don't know how I did it. I got on the train with this piggyback bassman,
Cool.
you know, and a suitcase and my Les Paul. So I thought, boy, that was, you know, it took me 3 months to get away with from these crazy guys, you know. And then I guess it was not long after that, I joined Neil Christian and the Crusaders, because Jimmy Page had left. He'd moved on to something else. So I was with Neil Christian for just a few weeks, really. And he was paying me like £15 a week, you know, no matter what we did, you know. And I thought, boy, that's handy, a steady £15 a week. This is great, you know. And then who should show up from Germany but the lead singer.
Oh, no,
yeah, he showed up and he was all apologetic and said, oh, I know. I said, oh, you know, and things are going to be different this time, you know. And like a fool, I went back to Germany with him. And I did actually, I don't know if I took the Les Paul or not. Maybe I didn't. I'm trying to remember now. Anyway, he said, oh, well, I'll get you a guitar, you know. So I got a nice, this would have been about 62 or 63, I got a nice red Stratocaster,
Nice.
you know. And anyway, at the end of this run, he decided to disappear. And fortunately, we had enough musicians to be able to carry on, you know. Back in those days, I don't know how the Beatles got away with it, but back in those days, you play a German club outside of Hamburg. I suppose you could do it in Hamburg, but outside of places like Hamburg, if you played in a club for 6 hours a night, you had to have a five-piece band.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't class you as a band unless there were 5 of you, and there were 5 of us when we started out at this place. And I remember we were up on stage one night, and there was hardly anybody in the audience. And in came the German military police and pulled one of the guys off stage because he was supposed to be in the army.
Supposed to be in national service or something like that, was it? And he'd gone AWOL.
Pulled him off the stage. And there we were, a 4-piece band. And I think the owner of the little club, it was in Dortmund, he was happy to let us go because there were no customers coming anyway. You know? So we were stuck there. And then that was when we... I guess I'm mixing the 2 tours with him, mixed. But these are some of the tales that happened with this guy. Anyway, I did go back with him again, and then he had this girlfriend who had a bit of money, and he kind of lost interest in it, and he disappeared. Unfortunately, we were able to finish out the gig that we did, because you did gigs in American bases, and you play for a month. You know, you sign on for a month. So I managed to escape that and got back to England, and a friend of mine, Ricky Charman, was playing bass with Chris Farlowe and the Thunderbirds. Yeah. And Ricky said, "Oh, Bobby Taylor, the guitar player, he's not going to play anymore. He's going to become an actor, you know," which he did eventually. So I joined Chris Farlowe. This was in '64. Yeah. And I stayed with him for about 4 years, and
he had some hits, didn't he?
And 65 or 66, he had Out of Time, right? Which is one of the few records of his I didn't play on. I think it was Big Jim Sullivan. The reason for that was it was produced by Mick Jagger.
Really?
Yeah, he wrote the song. You know,
okay.
It was Jagger Richard. So he produced it, and we did another one, My Way of Giving, too, which they'd written, you know. And he produced it, but when it came to Out of Time, he wanted his arranger to book the band. his musicians. So his name was Arthur Greenslade, and so that's how Big Jim Sullivan ended up on.
He was on almost everything anyway, though, wasn't he, at that time?
Yeah, well, yeah.
But yeah, I met him. I'm sure you knew him reasonably well, but you know, he used to do clinics for a guitar brand called Patrick Eggle. You know, all through his
those guitars,
60s or 50s and 60s, whatever like that. He was a real larger than life character, wasn't he? Some player as well.
I remember he asked me once about Patrick Eggle, and he said, he's a great guitars, and they're British. The British guitars, you know, you should try one. You should, you know. And I said, well, I'm really happy with one, you know. And he couldn't believe that I didn't want to play this English guitar, you know. I said, I'm really happy with what I got now. By that time, I had my first Telecaster. I bought a used Telecaster in 1963, I think, and my whole world changed.
Well, you kind of your Wikipedia blog says that, you know, you for a period of time you were just called Mr. Telecaster. You know, I mean, it's almost like Larry Carlton, Mr. 335, and you were sort of Mr. Telecaster. Yeah,
I don't know what I have. Well, I guess for a while, I mean, I was playing a telly. With Emmylou Harris later on, you know, and that not many people were playing tellies in England at that time. You know, they were all influenced by the Shadows and all the other, you know, the Hollies and that. They're all playing Gibsons and a lot of Strats, a lot of Strats, and because Bruce Welch was playing a Telecaster with the Shadows, and people regarded them as rhythm guitars, you know, which they certainly weren't, you know.
I'm still super intrigued to see where the country angle has kind of came from, because I
loved it. It was the first time I heard it.
Because this must have been at some point round about the sort of the mid '60s then that you kind of started to influence.
It happened long before that, because you know, I was buying music. I guess I love the rock and roll that was country influence, you know, like the Everly Brothers, and because I knew these guys had started out with a country background, you know, as did Buddy Holly, you know, and so where was I? Oh yeah, someone gave me an album. It was a Capitol album, American Capitol. It was a compilation of country hits, and it was released in like 1959. And I loved nearly everything on it. I thought, well, I love this music. It's great, you know. There wasn't a lot of guitar playing on it.
Was it very sort of fiddles and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I love the feel of the music, you know. So I think one of the first EPs I bought was a Grandpa Jones banjo, and it was great. I thought, oh, this is great. I love this.
That's amazing.
And but I was buying rock and roll. I was buying more rock and roll at that time, and I guess you know, when I was in Hamburg, I picked up a record which really changed my life. And I remember I was in the store with Tony Sheridan. I was looking through records, and there was this Mercury EP, and it had 2 tracks by Flatt and Scruggs and 2 tracks by George Jones.
Right.
And I took a chance on it, and well, I mean, it's still one of my favourite records now. This one of the tracks of George Jones. I thought, oh God, I just love this stuff, you know. And you know, I continued to play rock and roll, and of course we were playing a bit of blues with Farlowe. And then I discovered Buck Owens. Right. You know, and I started to buy his records, you know, and he had a great guitar player, Don Rich. Okay. You know, and they were all playing Telecasters, and it was that real twangy, you know, James Burton style, you know. And I think early 60s, another point in my life that really turned my head around, well, you remember Saturday Club, Brian Matthew. Well, I mean, this was going in the early 60s. It started out as Guitar Club on a Saturday morning, and then it became Saturday Club, and Brian Matthew was the host on that. And for a short while, they had what they called a country corner, where they'd play a couple of country records. And this particular Saturday, they played a record by Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know the Jimmy Bryant name. I'm not familiar with Speedy West.
Speedy West was just an absolutely wild steel guitar player. And they played on tons of records in the early 50s for Capitol. They did a lot of stuff for Capitol with Tennessee Ernie Ford and whatever. And they were just wild instrumentals that he used to do. And I thought, God, I love this guitar player, you know. And this one track they played on the radio was Arkansas Traveler, which was a fiddle tune, and I thought, I've never heard anybody play the guitar like that, you know. And that was early 60s, and it took me 7 or 8 years before I actually got a copy of the record.
Right.
And a friend of mine, he said, look what I got. I've got this 10-inch Capitol LP of Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant. And he gave it to me, and I rushed home and put it on. I was hoping it was as good as I remembered it, and I just, wow, this is what I call guitar playing. So that kind of started it, and of course I love James Burton. So that's when, you know, I realised that, you know, Telecaster was the guitar for me. You know, and I'd been through a few guitars at that time. You know, I bought, I reluctantly sold my Les Paul to buy a Super 400 that my friend had. You know, I thought, wow, top of the line Gibson. It's, you know, and they were like over £300 new, you know, back then. And I played that for a while with Farlowe, and I realised that I'd made a big mistake, you know, and I regretted selling my Les Paul. And this guy already had one, so he must have just turned it around and sold it on. And eventually, and he still has it, Eric Stewart, the Mindbenders.
Okay.
Yeah, 10cc.
Right.
He's still got it.
That original one?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, it's not original anymore. God, he carved it up. I did a BBC broadcast once, and there was a guitar case on the floor, and I looked at it, and there was like a dent in the top of it. I remember that dent. It was in a car crash that we were in, you know. Everybody had a car crash in those days, you know. We were all like in our teens. No, we did, you know.
This is the essential part. If you hadn't had a car crash, you weren't.
Yeah, everybody was in a car crash. Every band I was with had a car crash up until the mid-60s.
That's what playing till 5 in the morning probably does to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just sort of.
And we're all young, you know, and inexperienced. So, I opened up the case. I thought, that's my guitar. Wow, and I picked it up, and I looked at the back of it, and there was a big chunk taken out the back of it because it was too heavy. He'd cut a big chunk out of the back of it to lighten it, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, he's still got it, and it's now a 2 pickup, and it's now kind of a blonde or whatever. And it's his favourite guitar. He still plays it. You know?
Well, at least it's being played. That's the main
So
thing.
anyway, that disappeared, and I regretted that for a long time. And I'll jump forward a little bit. When I joined Clapton in '79.
Yeah.
The first rehearsal we had, he showed up, you know, he'd already had breakfast, you know, and brandy and lemonade. He'd already had his breakfast, you know, and I was showing him, I had a picture of my guitar. I said, oh, I used to have a Les Paul. God, I love this guitar. I really, you know, regret selling it, you know. And he said, oh, I got one of those. I used to play one of those, you know. I didn't think any more of it. The next day, his roadie came in with this case, opened it up, and it's his Les Paul Custom that he used with Cream and Delaney and Bonnie. And he gave it to me. He said, oh, yeah, well, you use it, you know. So I don't regret selling my guitar.
Yeah, please tell me you kept that one. Please tell me you kept that one.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Good man.
Oh, yeah, no, I've got that.
That'd be pretty special.
Oh,
when did you at some point feel that in order to pursue the country thing, you were just going to have to go to the States, or did you know? Because I can't imagine many other people in England at the time were sort of, you know, digging that kind of music.
Well, no, there were very few. Yeah, no, I mean, all this started for me when I first met the Everly Brothers. 1962, I met Phil. In fact, I was playing in a club with the band that I went to Hamburg with, you know, with the saxophone guy and whatever. And these guys were standing, you know, by the wall in the club, eyeing us up, you know. After, you know, I thought, well, they're taking a lot more interest than a lot of these other kids in the club are paying, you know. And we got to chatting. They were American, you know. He said, "Oh, yeah, we play too." And he said, "We're, you know, we're on tour over here." I said, "Oh, who are you with?" And they said, "Well, keep it quiet, but we're with the Everly Brothers." And I go, so anyway, the guitar player is named Don Peake, and he's still a very good friend of mine now, you know. And we'd sit down in his hotel room playing guitar and whatever, and he'd tell me about all the great guys in LA, and he really talked me into wanting to be in LA, you know, because all the music I loved was coming from California. I loved the Nashville stuff, you know, but I loved the rock and roll too that was coming out of California. And he was telling me about guys like Howard Roberts, and he was getting lessons from Howard Roberts, you know. Oh, great guy, he does all the sessions. And there's this young guy who does a lot of the rock and roll stuff. His name's Glenn Campbell. No, I'd never heard of Glenn Campbell. He said, "Oh yeah, he played on this and that." And I thought, oh, because I used to confuse him with James Burton, because I'd hear a real wiry telecast of all these bends, and I always assumed it was James Burton, but a lot of it was Glenn, you know. So I really wanted to be in LA, and I had no idea how I was going to get there. And then, of course, throughout the 60s, British invasion, everybody was going over there, you know. And I thought, why can't I get in the band that's going over there? And eventually that happened. Well, I left Farlowe because I wanted to give country a try. I knew some country players who were playing the Fuller's circuit in London. You know, there were a number of pubs that featured country bands. And I just happened to go one night to this pub, and then I started going there regularly once a week, and Chaz and Dave would go there too, you know. And this is before they started doing their Rockney stuff, you know. So we'd sit in with this band, you know. And anyway, the guitar player, Jerry Hogan, decided that he was going to pack it in and not play so much. He was working at IBM. He had a real job, you know. So the singer, John Derrick, and I decided that we'd put a little band together.
I hadn't realised your association with Jerry Hogan had gone back so far. I thought that was more of a...
Yeah. Oh, no, I first met him in...
Okay.
67 maybe.
Oh,
66, 67.
Cool.
So...
but his quitting that band has gave you the opportunity to join it, and that was the one that went to the States, was it?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
We started working the circuit and playing US bases, and we back various American country singers that came over, you know. Not top-line guys, you know, but, well, they were a mixture, really, you know. A bit of a mixture. We even played with Guy Mitchell. I don't know if you remember Guy Mitchell.
It's not one. No.
But Hank Lachlan and Lonzo and Oscar, you know. I mean, these were all names in Nashville, you know. So, and they'd all say, "Wow, you guys are great," you know. And they'd always say, "Oh, God, know how many. I wish I had $1 for every time an American said this to me back then. God, you guys are great. You should come to the States."
Yeah.
Anyway, it was. I quit the country band because I realised that I wasn't going to get very far playing country music in England at that time, and there were actual country clubs, and we go and play there, and the people there didn't like what we were doing, because I'd do a couple of Elvis things, you know. I'd do That's All Right Mama or whatever, you know. All they wanted was Jim Reeves and Johnny Cash. Yeah. So I thought, well, no, this is not what I want to do, because around that time...
That's more the western bit of country and western, isn't it? You were more...
it was around that time that the Burrito Brothers started up. You know,
that's a great name for a band.
The Flying Burrito Brothers, and you know, and the Dillards, and there were a lot of great records coming out of the States with... It was country, but it was with the rock and roll edge to it, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought, God, this is the kind of music I love, you know. So around that time, let's see, I quit the country band, and I actually did a few weeks with Sandy Denny. It was her first solo part of her career. You know, she's going to form a band, and I realised that no, maybe this isn't for me really. I should be doing something else. So Jerry Donahue took over for me in that band, and they became Fotheringay, you know, and then they eventually did an album and toured and whatever. And then I did a short spell with recording with Steve Gibbons, who's still around, great guy, great singer. And then the friends of mine, one of whom worked as a salesman in Lou Davis and Selma's. You know, he was the guy who sold me my Telecaster. You know, they decided to put a band together. They were, you know, really good songwriters. They'd written a bunch of stuff, you know. So we had a band did a few gigs under the name of Poet and the One Man Band. And I think I went off and did a few other things around that time too. But then eventually they came back to me and said, "Hey, we're gonna give it another try and see if we can be a band." Because with Poet and the One Man Band, it was their deal. You know, they were the songwriters and he was the singer. Tony was the singer, and we were just session guys on that. You know, but they said, "Right, we're going to actually put a band together." So we rehearsed. You know, got it together in the country, you know, went down to Wales, like a lot of bands did back then, you know, and we did a number of showcases, and we had Ahmed Ertegun and Artie Mogul fighting over us, you know, at Atlantic and Capitol, you know, and probably Country Boy had you know, helped sway the matter too, because it was a big guitar feature, and guitar was the big deal then, you know, English guitar players. So we signed with Capitol, and first thing we did the album, then we went off to California, and I thought, oh, this is great.
Dreams coming through now.
Here I am playing at the Troubadour. Phil Everly came out to see us, and Neil Diamond, and Jim Horn, the sax player, and you know, lots of great musicians, you know, come out to see us, and people clapping my guitar solos. I've never experienced that in England.
Really?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I remember they used to clap Eric Clapton, but not when I was down the Flamingo, hiding at the back with my little glasses on. I didn't get applause for my solos, but I just loved playing for the Americans, you know. I thought, oh, this is great. So I was back and forth quite a bit, and the band... Chaz Hodges was in that band, and we both decided we didn't like the way the band was going, and so we both quit at the same time. This was the end of '72, and we were going to put a band together. It was going to be like it could have been like Chaz, Dave, and Albert. You know, really. We did a couple of gigs, yeah. And then
I always wondered why Chaz and Dave never had a guitar player, and now we know. You blew them out. It's like
so they carried on doing what they did. They were called Oily Rags to begin with, or the rhyming slang for fags. Oily Rags. Got any oily rags? So anyway. I was at a record launch. I think it was our last Heads, Hands and Feet record, and I mean, we'd done this album for Ahmed Ertegun, and Chaz and I had left. You know, they were a little disappointed that the band was breaking up. You know, but they did keep me on, signed to Warner Brothers with a view to me doing a solo record, which I never did. They were paying me £50 a week to, you know, to get ready to do an album, you know. And but in the meantime, I ran into Rick Gretsch in London. He said, the Crickets are coming over. And Glendy Hardin, the piano player, he's got to finish up a couple of days with Elvis Presley in Las Vegas. So, you know, would you like to do a couple of gigs with us until he arrives? I said, fantastic, you know. Great. I was a huge fan of the Crickets, you know. So we played the Speakeasy, and I don't know if you remember the Speakeasy. It was where all the crazy musicians used to hang out, Keith Moon and whatever, and it was a great place. So I played there. The first night I played there with the Crickets, and Jerry Allison at the end of the night, he said, "Hey, that was great." He said, "Do you want to do the whole tour?" So off I went on the road with the Crickets.
Oh, fantastic.
Playing working men's clubs around the UK, and for a few weeks, And then not long after that, they flew me back to LA, and to do an album. So there we are in Los Angeles, and we're going to. I said, "Well, we're going to drive to Nashville to do this record." And I said, "Oh, okay." And, Rick and I hadn't travelled a lot in the States. I'd done a bit of travelling, flying around with.
Like a 3-day drive, is it, to get from LA to Nashville?
Oh, it was like 3.5 days, and that was non-stop. They were taking pills to stay awake, and I just felt dreadful when we got there. But yeah, when I got to Nashville, I thought, "Oh, this is fantastic." We did an album, and it turned out pretty good. And Bob Montgomery, who used to work with Buddy Holly in the early days, Buddy and Bob, they did a little duo. He was the producer. And we took a break one Saturday night. He said, "Yeah, come on, let's go down to the Opry, So we went backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, the old building, the Ryman Auditorium. And it was a lot different then, with tiny little dressing rooms at the side of the stage. He said, "Well, come on, let's see who's in here." And there's George Jones and Tammy Wynette, and he introduced me to them. I saw all these people and
kings and queens of country, yeah.
I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And I guess a few months later, I was back in England again, and I did another tour with the Crickets, and then back to LA again and did another album, this time in Los Angeles. And I started to spend a little more time there in LA, I actually bought a car from a musician friend of mine, and I'd play the local clubs and whatever. And I remember I was at Jerry Allison's house. This was 1973, and the Everly Brothers had a big fight and broken up. They never spoke to him for another 10 years. I was at Jerry Allison's house, and Don Everly called him. He said, "Hey, J.I., that's what we call Jerry Ivan Allison, J.I. He said, "I play this little bar, in the valley, you should come out. There's a lot of great musicians, and they're mostly country players, but the cream of the crop. Use all names that I'd known from, the back of albums, like Byron Berline, great fiddle player, John Hartford, who wrote Gentle on My Mind, and Doug Dillard, a banjo player, and Al Perkins, a steel player. So, anyway, J.I. said, "Oh, yeah, well, we'll try and get out there." He said, "Oh, by the way, I've got Albert Lee here. I'll bring him out too." And there was kind of a silence at the end of the line there, and Don said, "That's Phil's friend, isn't it?" So, anyway, I took my guitar, my Telecaster out there, and I immediately became Don's big buddy, and we did a lot over the next few years when he was solo, and I think he was really happy to have a sidekick, and I do sessions, and I remember one time I think I had about 3 of his guitars in the apartment, the house I was staying. He'd loan me these guitars.
Were you? Was there any sort of sense from the other American players at the time that you were maybe stepping on their patch, or was it very just very friendly kind of?
I can't really ever remember getting that feeling. In fact, people were really enthusiastic. They loved what I was doing. I was playing country, but I was playing with an English rock edge to it, And I was certainly accepted in LA. And,
I think it's probably fair to say that. You were better received over there, I think, than even over here.
At that time, much better, yeah. I thought, boy, I knew this is where I should be, and it's taken me all this time to get here. You know,
found your sort of spiritual
Yeah.
home. A lot of people take that about Nashville, don't they? You know, that as guitar players anyway, that there's some beating heart of guitar there. That,
well, yeah, it's a very small place there. LA's a lot bigger, of course, you know, but you know, you go out on the street, you run into so many people in Nashville. You know, you go to a restaurant, you about and see like half a dozen people
Right.
you know. You know, it's not quite like that in LA.
So when you came back to the UK then, so if we sort of jump forward, we go sort of late 70s now, how did the connection with Eric Clapton come up? Because, you know, you spent quite a long time touring with him as well, didn't you?
Yeah, well, let's see, I'm missing out the important part, which kept me in LA, was going along to see Emmylou Harris in the Hot
yeah,
Band.
of course, yeah.
And Glenn D was the piano player in that band,
Yeah.
who I played with in the Crickets. And I went backstage at one of their gigs, because I'd just go to see James Burton. You know,
Yeah.
I was a huge James Burton fan. You know, in fact, James invited us all to go and see Elvis, so we drove out to Las Vegas. So I did see Elvis once in his good days. You know. And I went backstage at a gig, and they said, "Oh, Albert, we're just thinking about you. You know, would you like to play with us for a few days? Because James is going to go and play with Elvis." I said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to, you know." So, make a long story short here, I did one gig with them. Actually, I was supposed to rehearse with them and maybe sit in on a couple of gigs, but I got a call like 2 days later from Glenn D. He said, "James has got the flu. You're playing tonight." So I was straight in at the deep end. Amazing. So that was it, and. James went off to do these gigs with Elvis, and they gave him an ultimatum and said, "Come on, James, we need a regular guitar player." And he decided that it was, you know, he was going to stay with Elvis, which was good in the short term, but not in the long term, as we know, because Elvis passed away the following year. But that was the moment. I'd been working with Joe Cocker out there for about 18 months, and I'd met my now wife. You know, so we were living at Joe's house, and off I went on the road with Emmylou, and we found a great little apartment in Malibu for relatively little money, overlooking the ocean. And I thought, this is it. I'm playing with a great band now, the kind of music I love.
Yeah. Here the boy from Greenwich is pinching himself, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's going...
Here I am in and by this time, you know, I'd gotten to know Don really well, and you know, he really appreciated my friendship at that time, you know, and he knew how much I coveted his guitars, you know. So he gave me his black J200 with the matching white pickguards, which I still have, of course. Yeah. So so I did Emmylou for a while, and then I signed up with A&M when I was with Joe Cocker, and I still believe to this day that Jerry Moss thinks he signed Alvin and not Albert Lee, because when I delivered the tracks to him, it was a bit down home for him. And I actually had Chaz and Dave playing, and I had a budget. I flew Chaz and Dave out to LA, and we had a ball doing these tracks, you know. But anyway, it sat there, and I think they wanted me to do more stuff, and then I think I went on the road with Emmylou, and so nothing much happened over the next year or so. And then I ran into Jerry Moss at a Joan Armatrading gig. I was playing with Joan Armatrading briefly. I took over from Jerry Donahue, and met Jerry Moss backstage. He said, "I'd really like you to finish that record, you know." So I managed to prize some more money out of him to redo a record, and I did it with the Hot Band, you know.
Right.
So the record came out in '79, but I'd gotten a call from Glyn Johns. He was recording with this American singer called Mark Beno at Olympic Studios in London. And Eric was playing guitar on it and some of Eric's band, you know. So I flew back to London to do these sessions, and at the end of the week, you know, Eric and his manager said, hey, well, do you fancy coming on the road? And I thought, I, you know, I've got a record coming out and I'm supposed to promote it. What am I going to do? I had to just decide what to do. Am I going to try and get back with Emmylou? I should really put a band together and work this record. But this is Eric Clapton. I'm going to enjoy this.
In the twining of stories, last week we had a chap called Tim Rennick here.
Oh, yeah. Well, he took over from me.
Bizarrely, the story that he had a Joan Armour trading gig, and Joan, she must live in Guildford because I see her in the store, you know, every couple of months or so. And you know, anyway, so Tim had the Joan Armour trading gig that he'd committed to, and Eric phoned him to say, "Do you want to do that?" And he said to Eric, first of all, I can't, I've promised Joan. And he slept on it, and a bit like you, just went, what am I doing? And then had to phone Joan's manager to say, I've got to do this Eric thing. But it's just so weird, like like in 7 days, we've had these two really, you know, sort of amazing stories from two people, you know, in the same similar place, same sort of time. Amazing. But so you made the decision.
That was 79. So off I went on the road with Eric for 5 years. And during that 5 years, he fired the whole band twice, except for me. He kept me on, you know. And,
what do you think that was? I mean,
well, he was not in a good place. He was drinking a lot, and.
But what was your connection with him that meant that your relationship endured, whereas perhaps the band wouldn't?
See, when I joined him, he had what he called the Tulsa Tops. He had Carl Radle and Dick Sims and Jamie Oldacre. These guys had been with him for about 8-9 years, you know, and he liked the idea of having an English guy on stage again, you know. And we were old mates from the Flamingo days when he was with John Mayall, you know. So we had a great time. We were good buddies, you know.
I mean, Tim was saying that similar, you know, he would have, you know, regularly be on these, you know, absolute all-night benders, and you know, as you say, the liquid breakfast and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he would come out, and yet still every night never ever missed a beat musically. Was just it was like unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, it was never bad, but there were there were graduations of his performance, you know, which
when was
he would admit to, I'm sure, you know.
What year did you start working with Eric?
79.
79, because I just watched a fantastic documentary, which I think may have been the year before, because I mean, certainly I didn't see you in it, but where he did the tour across Europe on the train.
That was before I joined.
That was before, was it?
That was Goring's train, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I've never seen this. If you guys have to, I can't just search on YouTube for Eric Clapton train tour, and this must be what, 77, then 78, something like that.
Something like that.
And Eric's got this obsession with trains, like every English sort of schoolboy's dream, and drive a train when you grow up.
Yeah.
And he's decided to put together this tour where the gigs are all strategically placed so that he can get the train from, and he must have rented, he can't have bought it, but he's either bought or rented an old Nazi, Goering's old Nazi train.
No, I think you could rent it.
Yeah.
And that's maybe still, I don't know.
Yeah, and all the kit was, and the band and everybody was just loaded onto the train after every gig, and but this documentary is, he is just drinking and solidly, and you know.
Well, he was when I was with him, you know. It was brandy for breakfast, sadly, you know. And but you know, he kicked the heroin, which is, you know, not an easy thing to do, I'm sure. But you know, when you got obsessions like that, you replace it with something, you know.
Did you always manage to avoid that kind of scene? Or
certainly avoided the heroin. Yeah.
But even the heavy drinking, you know, were you always relatively clean?
No, I was, you know, I love wine, you know, and you know, I drink it after the gig, you know, but usually beers or wine, you know, and certainly with dinner. I love a glass of wine with dinner, but no, I couldn't drink during the day.
Because that would have been, I mean, that was, I mean, he was just, well, where do you go from when someone writes, you know, Clapton is God, and then, you know, it's like, you just, there's nowhere else left to go, is there, really, from that point of view? But, you know, he's just a phenomenal talent, another one of this country's finest ever, isn't he? So, but that...
It was, he had a lot on his shoulders, you know. I remember we were walking around somewhere like Sweden or whatever, and we were walking down the road again. There was a music shop, and there was some kind of display in the window, you know, featuring him, you know. I said, hey, look at that, Eric, that's pretty cool, you know. And, you know, he said, no, you don't have to deal with it. It's not, you know, he didn't feel really comfortable with it, you know. But, no, I mean, I loved being with him, you know. We had a great time. But, I don't know, he just, as I said, I survived 2 band changes. And he finally let me go after this tour. I think we did a tour of Europe where we ended up in Egypt and
the
Israel.
train took a wrong turn somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we went to Egypt, and all of a sudden we were going to play at the American school there in Cairo, and they decided they weren't going to give us work visas to play there. So we ended up having a 3 or 4 day vacation right by the pyramids.
Nice.
So we took camel rides around there, you know, and if you ever get out there, you be careful, you know, because you get on a camel and bang, you're off, you know, and they take you out in the middle of the desert there on this camel. And they say, right, you know, the Americans, they usually give us like $150, you know, or $200. I said, oh, I don't have the money. I don't have that much money on there, you know. But Eric got caught out there with his wife, and he had to leave Patty out there while he went back to the hotel to get cash.
I'm only laughing because I bet you never thought that you'd hear stories of Eric Clapton and Albert Lee riding camels in Egypt at the beginning of this video. I was pretty sure people didn't tune in for that.
But I thought, the bastards, you know. I felt sorry for them, but they were real con artists, you know. And I had this young kid who took me, and when I started to complain about this, he was shouting out to his brother, and his brother came up and they were gnashing their dirty teeth at me, you know. I thought, I think I had about $50 on me, you know.
Could have bought 3 camels for that, I think.
It was a nightmare, yeah. But it was a great experience. We went into Cairo to the museum, and fantastic. But I got back at the end of that tour and went up to pick up what money I had left from Eric's office, and his manager said, well, sorry boy, but you know, decided not to use you on the next record, you know. But
was that a sort of a bit of a half a relief and half not? I mean,
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised, you know, because I've seen it happen so many times before, you know. I thought it's going to happen to me one day, you know, and sad really, but I moved on. And it was just about that time that I'd run into Eric after that. I remember we used to do these little gigs for Gary Brooker, his local Christmas gigs. Yep. And Eric would come and play, you know, around this
Cranley
area.
And
Eric, you know, I saw Eric at one of these gigs, you know, and he was a little guarded, you know, but we got chatting and usually talking about cars, about Ferraris and stuff, you know. He got, you know, it was because of him I bought a Ferrari. Nice. I'm so glad I did. It's a good investment.
Oh, you bought an old one, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I see.
61, yeah. It was
There's a whole other video. Oh, man.
So I've still got that, thank goodness, yeah. We got you know, talking about cars and whatever. But no, we've always run into each other over the years, and you know, I've done a few things with him, and of course I did the concert for George with him, you know, and that was so much fun. Yeah, but
you did Crossroads as well, I think, haven't you? At one
yeah,
point
I did. Well, I would have done. I missed the first one because I'd committed to do a thing in Boston, or was it, Baltimore. It was called the World's First Guitar Congress.
Right, sounds heavy.
Yeah, and you know, Andy Summers was on it, and there was a bit of a mixture, you know, of players. And this woman who put it together called me up. She said, I just found out that Eric's doing this huge concert. It's this like Crossroads thing in Dallas. The same weekend we're doing our concert. Do you think you could call him and get him to change it? I said, I don't think so. So we did this festival, and sadly it wasn't much of a success for her. You know, we got paid, but yeah,
it's a bad name.
It's a shame,
the Guitar Congress. It doesn't sound.
I've still got a mug with it.
Have you? But you did what Crossroads the following?
Yeah, I did every one after that.
Great.
Yeah,
I think I've got all those DVDs.
He actually asked me to do the first one, which I couldn't do, but I did every one.
Who were you on the bill with then, or not?
Oh,
on the bill?
no, usually with more of a country.
Yeah.
You know, like I did it with Vince Gill's band usually. You know, so it was great music, and Willie came out and.
Did you know that? I mean, at the time, I remember growing up and thinking that, having never really been listened to any country stuff. So for me, all the guitar heroes were the sort of, you know, the speedy Steve Vais and Gary Moores and all this, you know. And then I remember later in life hearing things like, you know, Vince Gill and stuff like that, and just thinking, and yourself, and just going, oh man, these guys are off, because they haven't got lots of distortion and effects to hide behind. This is just straight up plugged into an amp, and the technique is insane. Yeah, I mean it's just,
well, you can't hide behind the effects with playing that way. You know, there aren't many players out there who will just plug into the front of an amp. You know,
with a Telecaster as well, with a guitar. It's almost like. Yeah. This, like, you're just laying your soul bare here, aren't you? I'm just plugging in, and if I make a mistake, it's coming out.
I used to play with Vince out in LA, you know, and he was quite young, and you know, he was, you know, I mean, he will tell you that I was one of his big influences on the Telecaster at the time, as was Ricky Skaggs, because he didn't play electric guitar at that time. He played mandolin and acoustic guitar and fiddle, you know. Yeah. And he decided that he wanted to learn to play a Telecaster.
He got quite good,
Yeah, so we worked together with the Hot Band, and I played on a few of his records. But so after I got fired from Eric, I mean, these things fall into place. I was, let's see, it was 83. And I got a call from a friend of, a real dear friend of Phil Everly's. His name's Terry Slater. And he played bass, he's an English guitar player and bass player, but he played bass with the Everlys in the 60s for a while, and remained Phil's friend to the end, you know. And anyway, he called me up, he said that the guys have been getting together, you know, doing little secret rehearsals, and they decided that they want to give it another try. This is after 10 years, you know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He said, you know, are you interested in, we're going to do this show at the Royal Albert Hall, the reunion concert. I said, oh, fantastic. I thought, oh, great, after all this time, I'll get to play with the Everly Brothers at least once, you know. So, we rehearsed here in London, and after the first day's rehearsal, we showed up the second day, and they said, oh, someone's broken into the rehearsal room, half the stuff's gone. And these kids had picked up the, you know the 410 Music Man amps. I had one of those. Well, I still got it here in England, and they're really heavy. You know, we've got four 10-inch JBLs in it. They lifted it up over like an 8-foot wall and got it. And fortunately, it remained in. Anyway, the police found them. Like a day later.
They followed the trail of sweat, basically.
Later that day, we got everything back.
Oh, thank
they were
goodness
just
for that.
Young kids, you know. So anyway, the concert was a huge success. I thought, wow, I've got to play with them once, you know. And then I don't know if it was a week or a month later, I got a call from Terry. He said the guys have been offered a record deal, and they're going to tour the States this summer. Are you available? I said, well, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got fired by Eric. You know? So off we went on the road, and I thought, wow, this is great, you know, and really good band. And I thought, well, I wonder how long this will last, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, it lasted for 26 years. I worked with them for 26 years after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you, I mean, you must have, at this time, I'm looking over at Wayne now, trying to guess his age and everything like that. But obviously you're now starting to balance, you're trying to balance your career with fatherhood, with, you know.
Well, you know, sadly, I disappeared off to America.
You did,
yeah.
It was just.
But I mean, we were still close, but they didn't see much of me there for a few months, especially when I was with Emmy Lou.
Right.
I didn't come back to England for about 15 months or so.
I mean, that's tough, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I came over to do an Emmy Lou tour in the UK, and you know, I hadn't seen Wayne and his sister for, you know, well over a year.
Wow.
You know, we talk on the phone.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, after that, I you know, I was coming over regularly.
Making more of a,
you know,
and try and fit the family in with the touring and the work schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. I think that's always tough, isn't it, as a touring guitar player? You know, particularly I think when you're one of the band rather than the you know, because it's a bit like, I suppose you don't feel like you can demand that the family come along or time off or whatever. It's just, if they're the dates, then they're the dates.
Wayne ended up coming on the road with me.
Really?
Yeah, well, he didn't. It was more fun for him to ride with the roadies in their bus than ours.
Oh, there must be some memories.
So
from
he was
there.
on the road with us for a while, and I've got twin daughters too.
Wow.
One of them, well, they both came out separate times with me for a little while, you know.
Is this during the Everly Brothers stuff?
Yeah, the Everly Brothers stuff, yeah, because there was always lots of room on the bus, and you know, Phil was pretty cool about having people around on the bus. You know, Don preferred his
right.
You know, a little quiet. He didn't have so many people on his bus, you know, but yeah, we used to get crazy on Phil's bus, you know, but after the gig, you know. Well, the last time I saw Phil before he passed away, we were at some Buddy Holly special in LA at this theatre. It was the day that Buddy Holly got his star on Hollywood Boulevard, and then we showed up. We were in Capitol Studios, and I presented Phil with a guitar. There's a guy here who has sponsored this foundation where they make these copies of Buddy Holly's first Gibson guitar, and they hand them out to various musicians. I was lucky enough to get one, you know. Wow. And I presented Phil with his that day, you know. Anyway, we did. We went to see this show that night. I wasn't participating. Well, I didn't know I'd be participating until I got there for the rehearsal, and Peter Asher had put it all together. He'd done an album of Buddy Holly songs, you know, which I wasn't on it. But he came up to me during the rehearsal. He said, would you get up and play in the encore? I said, well, yeah, I don't have a guitar here. You know? Oh, we'll find you a guitar. Please, you know. So that was the last time I saw Phil, you know. And I remember we were chatting before the gig, and he said, I kind of miss those old days, you know, when we were on the road. He said, I don't miss being on stage, but I miss being on the bus with everybody.
Awesome stories. Yes, we've just had a short interlude, but, you know, unbelievable of crowd. I've not quite heard as many famous names clanged into an interview as so. I mean, that is well, some career. No. If it was me, I'd be dropping them in left, right, and centre.
Well, I feel very, very fortunate that I played with so many heroes of mine, you know, and I never thought it would happen, you know. Just the Everly Brothers and the Crickets alone, you know. When I was 14 or 15 and I heard their records, I never would have dreamt that I would have spent so much time with these guys late in life, you know.
Yeah, and that, yeah. I'm sure that, you know, you will sit and reflect on just what an unbelievable... And I wonder sometimes whether you're in it, whether or not you really realise just how, like, I mean, of all the 8 billion, 7 billion people on the planet, you know, there's a minuscule number of people that will be able to go, yeah, that happened to me. You know, it's just, it's insane.
I feel very fortunate.
But anyway, you shouldn't feel, I mean, you obviously deserved it. You know, you've worked unbelievably hard, and your talent on the guitar has put you in these places. But I guess, you know, one of your most enduring relationships throughout this time has been with a guitar supplier, you know, as well as the artist that we talked with in Music Man.
Yeah. Well, it was Ernie Ball to begin with. I'll tell you how it started. Yeah. It was probably on our second Head, Hands and Feet tour. We were playing, I think we played at the Forum. We were opening up for somebody like Jethro Tull or whatever, and then we had our own gig at the...
Clang. I'm going to do that now every time. Clang, clang.
and we played a club in LA, and I don't know how. I guess they came up to us at a gig. Ernie Ball was, you know, used to listen to radio. He kept his finger on the pulse, listening to music, you know, and he heard this. He heard Country Boy on the radio. And he was just highly tickled to discover that this was an English band playing country, playing this song, you know. So he and his son Sterling came to see us play. They came to the Forum, and they came to the Whiskey A Go-Go to see us, you know. And they said, oh, you should come down to the factory. You know, they were down in Newport Beach at the time, you know, and they were just doing strings.
Yep.
Well, in fact, they were making acoustic guitars, Earthwood guitars, which they didn't really take off. I don't know. I guess they sold a few, you know, and they were making those big acoustic basses too, you know. But they said, yeah, come on down, you know. So I went down, had dinner with the family, you know, Ernie and his wife Nova, and maybe. Well, it was Sterling and maybe David, the brother, or probably his sister, Little Nova, we called her. And anyway, I'd go down there regularly, and I'd end up staying at the house and sleeping on the couch when there wasn't a spare bedroom, you know. And really, it was like a home from home. And I think it was around that time that Ernie and Nova got divorced, you know. But you know, they were all real friendly, and I'll get to see them all. And so I started to do little gigs with Sterling. He'd play, you know, the high school band and that, and we'd do sort of silly little gigs, you know. We actually did one gig where Ernie brought his steel guitar out, because he's originally a steel guitar player, you know. He played guitar with us. And around that time, Leo Fender and Tom Walker started the Music Man company.
Right.
So I immediately had an amplifier. Sterling called up. He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "You know, Tom Walker is a really good. He's actually Tom was Sterling's godfather."
Right.
You know? So he said, "Yeah, Tom's designed all these amps, and they want to get you one, you know." So I said, "Oh, fantastic," you know, and I don't know, I can't remember where if they shipped it to me, or if I went down to, I probably went to the factory. Anyway, I ended up with like 15 of them. Every time there was a new amp, you know, I started off the 130 watt 210, which is, you know, this big, weighs a ton, but yeah, it's a monster, you know. And then of course I got a 410, because I always loved the original Fender Bassman. Yeah. In fact, going back a bit, I still have, and I was probably the only person to have them in the 60s. I had two original 410 Fender Bassmans in England, because they never were imported here. You know, they didn't start.
And just as well for Jim Marshall that they weren't. Yeah, otherwise, if anyone had been able to get a Bassman, he might never have felt the need to rip it up. Well, did I say that?
Here we are in LA and Newport Beach, and Sterling's got me couple of Music Man amps.
Yeah.
And then I ended up with Joe Cocker and realised I need something a bit bigger.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I got a couple of 130 heads and about 2 or 4 cabinets, I think, like reflex cabinets and whatever. And each time they'd come out with an amp, you know, a new amp like a 110 or a 112 or whatever, or the 100 watt RPs, you know. I've got 3 of those, I think. Yeah, I've got 2 of them in England still. Yeah. So I've probably got about 15 of those, you know.
And they were quite ahead of their time in the sense of that height, because the ones I remember, I don't know what. I remember being in and around Andertons late 80s, probably, are my earliest memories of it. And these Music Man amps being the solid state preamp, solid state front end, and a valve power stage, which was really sort of back to front with what other manufacturers were doing. But they sounded phenomenal, super clean. But as you say, unbelievably heavy. I don't think they ever really took off, did they? Not in the way their guitars did.
I mean, they weren't cheap either, were they? No. And especially if they had like eminent speakers in them at the time, you know. And I always put JBLs in mine, you know.
Classic, the Fender Twin with the 2 JBLs and everything. You pick it up and the arm comes out your socket. Like.
Yeah. So so I just, and I got to know Leo Fender down at the factory too. Go down there and trying different amps and whatever, you know. And
I don't think I've ever met anyone that's met Leo Fender before. Was he an enigmatic kind of guy?
Yeah, he was great. Nice. Walk around with the pens in his top pocket and stuff, you know. No, he was great. I've actually got a cassette of where we were trying out amps and whatever, and I had a cassette player going as well, and Chaz and Dave were with me, so this would have been...
They get everywhere, these two, don't they?
No, this is when we did the album in LA, so they came down there, so they got to meet Leo
People
Fender
of my age, or maybe slightly younger, will literally have no idea that there was a Chaz and Dave prior to the whole Cockney thing.
Oh yeah.
But it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But so you had Leo, you got to meet Leo, try stuff.
And and then he was making the guitars and the basses, and Tom was building the amps. So I had a couple of the guitars, and I thought they were all right. You know, they were a little bit clunky. I preferred my telly, you know. And sadly, Leo and Tom had a falling out. So Leo went off and started G&L.
Yeah.
And Tom carried on for a little while. And a bit of a struggle for him, and he decided to sell up.
Yeah.
And he sold it to Ernie Ball with the provision that he'd carry on working for Ernie Ball, you know, and that he had his own place at the factory and where he was designing stuff and that. You know. I've got an amazing stereo amp that he built in really like polished wood. I think he only made like 3 of them. You know, and I've still got that one. He used it like 3 or 4 times. It's at home somewhere. That was the prototype that he built, and Sterling's brother Sherwood had one, I think. And
is there like some sort of unbelievable Albert Lee cave somewhere where you sort of open the door and literally just like there it is, 200 amps and 500 guitars?
They're spread around the world.
Are they?
They're spread around the world, yeah. I need to write a list out.
You should. I remember someone telling me a story about Van Halen once, Eddie Van Halen, with this and going into his lockup, and it's just literally thousands of amps and guitars that just over his career people have given him or he's bought and I don't know if he liked something. I'm really trying to remember what the amp was. I can't remember what it escaped me, but if he liked something, he would buy like 100 of them, just obsessive about that. Anyway. So when did the because it's unusual, that whole Music Man story and the very short period of time that Leo Fender was actually involved, and as you say, when you sort of read in between the lines, it feels like it was never really felt like he felt as vested in that as he was with the Fender and with the G&L thing later. It was almost like a sort of not really sure here.
Yeah, I think this was the first thing he'd done since he took a break, when he sold
Yeah.
it to CBS. you
Yeah.
know.
But so when did the guitars really,
Well,
and why
once
was it
Ernie,
that?
when Ernie bought the company, and then Sterling would call me up. He said, well, I think we're going to maybe put out a guitar. We're going to start from scratch, you know. So we, you know, he'd ask our opinion. You know, Steve Morse was involved at the time too. You know, so we give our 2 cents worth of what we thought we'd like in a guitar. And you know, the first one was the Silhouette. So you know, I had the first Silhouette they built for me. I had ebony fingerboard on it because I used to like that on the Les Paul Custom, you know. But a later one that they built for me is still one of my favourites. It's just like a regular Silhouette with you know, pickups somewhat like this, but a telly back pickup on it, you know. And it was great to play, really comfortable, you know. It's still one of my favourite guitars, you know.
It's the Ernie Ball when the Music Man neck is quite different to any other guitar that you'll pick up. I mean, it feels, you know, narrower here than a Telecaster, narrower generally than a Telecaster neck, and perhaps a little bit more sort of circular feeling at the back.
Yeah.
Was that? Do you remember at the time you and Steve Morse kind of going, do you know, try this or?
Well, I don't know. I guess the Silhouette's a little different, you know. But I think it was like a year or so later. It was at the trade show, and they said, well, you know, they got this new guitar, and it was called the Axis.
Yes.
This was called the Axis then, and I said, "Oh, I like that. It's kind of wacky looking. I really like that, you know." And they didn't have a big production going because once they taken over the name, they the big seller was the Music Man bass.
Of course.
You know, everybody wanted a Music Man bass, the Stingray bass. So I think it was maybe a few months later or whatever, we were just about to do one of our gigs, you know, with Sterling, you know, and he called me up, he said, "Oh, I've just had a guitar built, wait till you see it, you're going to love it." And it looked just like this. It was a solid maple body with a maple neck, exactly the same as except it was plain white pickguard and a slightly different facet here. It had a facet that went down here. And anyway, I opened the case up. I said, "Oh, fantastic!" He went, "Okay, it's yours." And that was it. It was my guitar, and I played that guitar forever.
Yeah.
You
Had you never been approached with guitar endorsements or anything
Oh,
before?
Fender, yeah.
Loads of times, but
well, I've Telecaster, you know, and I'd say, yeah, well, and I'm, you know, so glad that I didn't really, because my experience of all the guys that had signature Telecasters, you know, the guy who signed them up has left the company, you know, and they kind of lose it. You know, Jerry Donahue had one, and you know,
it's a topical theme.
Yeah,
at the moment,
and
you know, still is now.
But you know, I've been loyal to Sterling, and he's been loyal to me. You know, and
so that shape that was originally called the Axis became your signature model.
Yeah, well, you know, it was. I think once he started working with Eddie, and they'd made him something like 26 prototypes. You know, every other week they'd fly down to LA with a couple of guitars and say, "Try this." Well, "Oh no, I don't like that." You know, and eventually got something that he liked. You know.
Yeah.
So they were able to build a larger facility for making guitars, and then Sterling said, "I think we're going to put your guitar out." You know.
Brilliant.
And he said, "What do you want to do with it? Do you want a teleback pickup on it?" And I said, "Well, maybe, I don't know." And I couldn't make my mind up, you know. And they made a couple of. I've got one of these guitars. They made like a big pick-shaped plate here with a telly type pickup in there, you know. So that could have been it if I decided on it, you know. But I couldn't make my mind up. He said, "Oh well," he said, "I'm going to go with the one you've been playing." So out it came, you know, just a regular, not with the maple, but it was just an ash body. And for some reason, they decided not to put the the extra facet there, you know, and but maybe it was made it a little easier in the production, you know, to not have so many operations on the machine.
I think it's become, yeah, I mean, it's become an iconic part. So after Van Halen, were you the second? You were the second artist, sort of signature model, because obviously.
Oh no, Steve was first.
Steve Lukather.
Yeah, Steve.
Right.
No.
Oh, Steve Morse.
Steve Morse was the first one. Yeah.
Oh really? So he had the first signature Ernie Ball, did he?
Yeah.
Or a Music Man guitar.
Oh yeah, long before I did.
St Vincent. Shouldn't forget that one.
Well,
although she wasn't there. She wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, she was playing one of mine.
Yes.
For a while, you know, she loved it, and then I guess she talked Sterling into doing a model for her, you know. Well, of course, you know, Bruno Mars has got a bunch of these now, playing them, and I'm praying that he doesn't go to Sterling and say, "Can I design a guitar?"
He's a talented dude, that guy.
Oh, he is,
he?
yeah. I've only heard a bit of what he's done, but no, he is, yeah.
Do you want to, you know, give us some tones, or just a little bit of a?
Yeah, well, it's very, you know, I don't. Yeah, you know what I do. It's it. I mean, it's.
Is that position 2 your kind of typical sound?
Yeah, most of the time, I use these two, yeah.
Yeah.
This pickup is boosted a little hotter than a Strat pickup. You know, these are Seymour Duncans.
Right.
And so it's a little hotter, yeah. But most of the time I'm using these two together, or this one on its own. Ballads, sometimes these two together, or this one on its own, you know. But most of the time it's these two, yeah.
It's such an iconic sound. I remember the first guitar clinic I saw with you, and you really explained how you used the slapback delay thing to get that sort of double-tracked guitar sound, and it's just so you know, when you hear that, you play even just a few chords, you know.
I suppose I do have a recognisable tone and style.
It's not many guitar players, I think, can claim that, you know. I think you know, when you sort of you hear something and you go, oh yeah, that's Eric Clapton, or you know, that's B.B. King or whatever, and you go, you're in that kind of vein of just going like, it's a sound. It's just were you able to? Because it was interesting. You used like a Korg rack mount sort of delay.
Yeah.
Is that just like an always-on feature of your guitar playing, or?
Oh yeah. So
it's just
I used like maybe 3 settings on there. Mm-hmm. You know, there's one similar to what I got here, like a delay. There's a little compression and reverb.
Yeah.
You know, and then another setting I'll add a little chorus.
Yeah.
And then for, you know, sort of my version of a kind of power sound is a real very quick delay, you know, that has a lot of punch to it.
Almost like a double-tracked kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not a shredder in the mold of what people think of as now as shredding, you know, because I hate to disguise the guitar.
Yeah, I've never really heard you be a big sort of user of any kind of distortion or anything like that.
I hate it.
Really?
I hate it, yeah. You know, I like a little bit of compression, you know, to get some sustain out of it, but not a great deal, you know.
When you were doing the Clapton thing, though, I mean, was that not?
I didn't have a lot of effects then.
Really?
I think maybe I had a friend of mine worked for Lexicon in the States, and he got me a really nice PCM 42, really nice delay, and you can add, you can modulate the delay, so you get a little bit of chorus in there.
But you weren't driving like Marshalls and getting big dirty sounds or anything.
Never.
It was all still clean, was it?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm kind of odd man out, really, in a way. But there are a lot of guys who play that way, you know, who play the style that I play now. You know, I love Brad Paisley. I love what he does. He's just amazing. You know,
Oh,
but
phenomenal.
he's got tons of compression on it. You know, but it's still clean. You know, and that twang that he gets. You know?
I love it. And of course, so the range of your signature guitars goes from the sort of, you've got the basic American one. You've done this gorgeous, this is a few years old now, isn't it? But this gorgeous all rosewood neck version of it as well, which I'm going to grab it because I just think these things sound. This weighs next to nothing. This one. So you've got the two humbuckers, solid rosewood neck versions. What was on the humbucker side of things? Is that just something
that
you
was
use?
that. I have to say that was their idea.
Right.
They called me up and said, well, you know, a lot of guys like humbuckers, and what do you think if we put a couple of humbuckers?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, well, you guys know what's best. Yeah, great. And I have one. That, you know, I've used it a few times, but I always come back to this sound, you know. But I do like the humbuckers, but I know a lot of guys do like this now. In fact, they only made three of them with three humbuckers.
3 humbuckers.
Yeah.
The Nigel Tufnell signature.
Yeah.
Although Steve Morse's guitar's got a few pickups on it, hasn't it? So
So I have one with 3 humbuckers, and I haven't seen it in a while. it's
amazing. Like an old sort of Les Paul
in one
Custom
of those
or something,
cases,
isn't it?
And they did them with 3 P90s as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never seen one of those.
Oh, you haven't? No.
No.
They did them for a short while, and I love the sound of the P90s.
Yeah.
And in fact, I asked them. They built me a guitar not too long ago, with just 2 P90s in it.
Yeah.
And with 2 volume controls, and I still haven't quite worked out if I like the way I've set it up. And they actually sent me another pick guard, you know, with you know, similar to this, with a 5-way switch and whatever, you know. So I'm experimenting with that, but I do like the sound of the P90s, and I think I might give that a try when I go home.
You should do, absolutely.
Yeah.
And more recently, like as in for this year, oh, hang on, what have we got here? We've got another gorgeous one. Is that another BFR? I think it's another humbucker one, but look at that with like a baked maple.
Yeah, that's nice.
Bird's eye maple neck.
I just played that one earlier.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a very nice one. Yeah.
Stunning. And they're nice.
Yeah.
They're quite. I was going to say aerodynamic, but it's the wrong word. But you know, the design is functional, isn't it? It sort of
I
the
think
balance
so,
is
yeah.
nice. It sort of there's
Yeah.
nothing's getting in the way.
Yeah.
The one ergonomic. That was the
yeah.
word, not aerodynamic. And then, of course, talking of dear old Sterling, son of Ernie.
Well, this is relatively new to me. First one I've seen one up close. I think I did see one at NAMM when
Yeah.
I was there. But yeah, they're pretty good, and you know, it's a great way to sort of get into the Music Man family. Really.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so all the
Yeah.
proper Music Man stuff will be American made, and then to make a more affordable version. I think they do sterling versions of most of the artist models.
Yeah,
you know,
oh yeah, they took it. They only just started to do this, you know. But you know, I left it up to them. They decide. They know the market, you know. So.
Yeah, it's still got a very similar feel. It feels just a smidgen wider at the nut than maybe the American ones do, but it's got a very
definitely,
similar kind of vibe. But very, very cool.
Yeah.
It's going to be remiss of me not to play some 12-bar thing, old rock and roll thing, and you to noodle over the top.
Okay.
Because let's be honest with you, I'm never going to get another chance to do this. And then when I'm 70-something years old, I shall name clang to my grandchildren going, there was this time when I played with Albert Lee. Oh, I'm sorry to put you on the spot and make you do that, but that was very, very cool, and thank you very, very much for doing
you're
that.
welcome. Thank you.
So I have one last request, and hence the reason the piano is in the corner. And this is a sort of a happy and a sad memory for me, but my late father-in-law was a massive Albert Lee fan.
Oh, really?
And I first met him actually before I even met my wife, so his daughter, at an Albert Lee clinic. And he and I used to go and see you every time you'd play locally, but he'd never met you. And probably about 8 weeks before he passed away, maybe a bit more than that, 12 weeks before he passed away, you did a clinic for Andertons. He came along, he was very unwell at the time, but you spent some time with him after the gig, talked to him, and I know he was absolutely, absolutely made up. And then at his funeral, the song that his best friend suggested we play was Highwayman by Johnny Cash. Oh, and then, of course, earlier this year on the Old Grey Whistle test, I see you're on there, and you get your piano out and you play Highwayman. Anyway, look, this is Albert Lee playing Highwayman by Johnny Cash for my late great father-in-law, Claude Wilkins. I honestly can't thank you enough for this.
I was a highwayman, along the court road I did ride. Sergeant pistol by my side. Many a young girl lost her baubles to my trade. Many a soldier left his lifeblood on my blade. Finally hung me in the spring of 25. I am still alive. I was a sailor, born upon the tide. With the sea I did abide. Sailed a schooner round the Horn of Mexico. I went aloft and furled the mainsail in a blow. When the yacht broke up, they say that I got killed. I am living still. I was a dam builder, crossed the river deep and wide, stealing water did the line. Place called Boulder on the wild Colorado. Slipped and fell into the wet concrete below. They buried me in that great tomb that knows no sound. But I am still around. All goes round and round. a starship, cross the universe divide. When I reach the other side, find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a highwayman again. I may simply be a single drop of rain. I will still remain. I'll be back again.
Unbelievable.
Oh, well, thank you.
You are a true gentleman,
Oh,
Albert
you're
Lee.
welcome.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much for doing that.
I've got to tell you a funny little story.
Do let's end on a happy note.
Jimmy Webb is out doing a lot of solo gigs now.
Right.
You know, he's goes out and does a lot. I've seen two, I think, recently. You know, I knew him back in LA in the 70s when I first got to meet him. So some people come up to him and have gone up to him and said,
done the whole
"Boy,
great-
I love that Albert Lee song you do." So, Albert Lee, I wrote that song.
Oh man. Oh well. At least he get the royalty checks, doesn't he? So.
Boy, does he? Yeah.
Oh well. Look, thank you so much again for
It's a
coming on to
pleasure,
Andertons. Thanks
guys.
again to Wayne and all the guys at Strings and Things for helping organise this. But yes, long may you continue doing what you do, because you're a
let's
wonderful
hope so.
musician. And yeah, it's been brilliant. But thank you guys for watching another episode of Andertons TV, and we shall see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.